Okay, I have Michele Worden with me here again today. Probably will all know Michele by now. Michele works at the Countess of Chester Hospital, was an advanced neonatal nurse practitioner. I've done several interviews with Michele. If you haven't seen them, then they're all on my channel, so check them out. But without further ado, I'll just say hello to Michele and thanks for joining us today.
Hi Chris, how are you?
Pretty good, Michele, pretty good. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me back.
It's no problem. Is it miserable to be back in Britain, having been in Spain for the last month? Because I went out today and it was freezing.
Well, it's a bit mixed here. It's we've got some blue sky. It's not particularly warm, but then the weather in Spain was very mixed as well.
Okay.
But it was nice just to be beside the seaside, as they say.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's nice to have you back. We're going to continue through viewers' questions today. We're getting closer to the end of that list now. But since I spoke to you last, it's been a little while. Quite a few things have been happening. I don't think we can cover all of them today, but I just wanted to talk to you about a couple of things first. So since our last conversation, Sir David Davis has spoken up in Parliament about the police issue. Then Chief Constable Mark Roberts responded, and then essentially David Davis slapped him down pretty quickly. So, what did you think about all that? Do you have any reflection on that episode?
Um, I thought David's speech was very good in Parliament. I was quite shocked that the Chief Constable came back and attacked David Davis and accused him of misleading Parliament when David, I'm sure, did due diligence and wouldn't say anything that without actually being able to fully back it up. So I was quite shocked at that response from the chief constable, and I thought it was an own goal because you can't accuse a senior politician of misleading Parliament and not expect for him to come back and point out all the inaccuracies that he put in that letter. So well done, David. And I think the chief constable should be asking serious questions about his police force and what he's allowed. I live in Cheshire, and it really annoys me that they're cutting back on local bobbies, and yet Cheshire Constabulary spent £7,000 patting themselves on the back and awarding themselves hummingbird necklaces. So even without the appalling investigation they did for Lucy, I think as a taxpayer, that is just mismanagement of government funds, taxpayers' money. And that in itself should be investigated.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've highlighted many times that they just stopped doing their Twitter completely. I assume the reason is because they know they'd be criticised. Um, and that's just essentially that's a service to the community. I mean, that's something they're really supposed to do. I don't think they're obligated to do it, but they certainly felt obligated to do it until the 8th of December 2024. Then they just stopped.
Yeah.
And I think it is worrying that they will pour millions into these high profile convictions because and it seems to be from the outside, obviously I don't know for certain, but it seems to be that they got overexcited about having a big case and they were so proud of what they'd done. And that's fair enough, I suppose, on one level, if they're right. But I still think they shouldn't lose sight of the fact that their job is to police Cheshire, as you rightly say. And they just seem to have completely lost sight of what they're supposed to be doing at this point.
Well,
Uh,
I think from the very beginning they were starstruck with Dr. Ravi Jairam and Dr. Stephen Brewery. I would love to know what those two actually said to the police in the first meeting, because 3 days prior, Cheshire Police were saying no case to be had here. And then those two rock up and spin some sort of a tale, and the next minute Operation Hummingbird's launched. And we know that certainly Dr. Ravi Jairam has committed perjury in court. So, as David Davis said, they should release all their police investigation records if they want to be open and transparent so that everybody can see exactly what's gone on. But it's obvious they were completely starstruck. And I mean, I think I've said this before on this podcast that when I phoned Cheshire Police in 2018, they were not in the slightest bit interested in what I had to say. All they wanted to know was, did I know Lucy? Did I work with Lucy? And did I have any evidence against Lucy? That is not a full and comprehensive investigation.
Right. So interestingly, Michelle, as we're recording this, today is the 1 year anniversary of Sir David Davis writing to Cheshire Police requesting an investigation into Dr. Jairam.
Right.
I've just tweeted about this today. I'll tell you what I've written. I've put, today is the 1 year anniversary of David Davis writing to Cheshire Police requesting an investigation into Dr. Ravi Jairam. I'm not going to reiterate the issues with Jairam's court testimony. This has been authoritatively established elsewhere. And then I've put, we were informed at the time that the Chief Constable has received the letter. This has been reviewed and he will be responding in due course, addressing all the concerns raised. I accept that in due course references an indeterminate period of time. It does, however, typically imply that there will be a relatively prompt response. It is notable that when Sir David spoke in Parliament on the many obvious blunders inherent in Operation Hummingbird, the response from the Chief Constable of Cheshire Police, while execrable in quality, was considerably more swift. I accept that an investigation into Jairam's comments would take longer, but this is a relatively straightforward matter. It does not require a complex investigation. We have already reasonably traversed beyond the point where due course has elapsed. Will we ever hear any more about this? So that's what I've tweeted today, and we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? But he literally said, we'll get back to you in due course. That was a year ago today.
I know. Cheshire Police are just doubling down, really. And if they had any sense, they should be now conducting an investigation into where it went wrong and what Steve Breary and Ravi, how they misled them, because those two, to me, are the two most culpable people in all of this. They pointed the finger at Lucy in the very beginning. I've no idea why Steve Breary very quickly pointed the finger at Lucy when, I'd love to know that, why it was her. Was there a personality clash? Lucy, we know, was very diligent doing Datixes. She even did Datixes on herself. She apparently always followed the book, followed the guidelines. So was he just annoyed with her and wanted her to leave? And then this runaway train started, especially when the police got involved, and they were too far down the line then. There's lots of questions, but Cheshire Police should be definitely investigating Dr. Steve Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam. And in a way, that could be their saving grace, because if they were honest and open, they could say, look, we were misled here. We did our best, but we were completely misled by these two.
Yeah. I mean, they really should have done their due diligence. I mean,
They should have done.
There is no defense for them really, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
But then as a nurse, if I had £1 for every time a relative spoke to a consultant and was just awestruck because they're a consultant of whatever speciality, I'd be a very wealthy woman.
Yeah.
And I think the police are only human. I think they were exactly the same, that they had two consultant pediatricians who said, we don't understand why these babies have died. And Cheshire Police definitely should have investigated those two and should have called in, as Steve Watts says, a multidisciplinary team to look at all aspects of the unit, the staffing, the sewage problems, the environment, and these poor babies. So they did fail spectacularly, but I don't know how much behind the scenes Ravi and Steve, and then when Darry Evans rocked up, were directing the investigation. So the police were led down the wrong lines of inquiry.
I think that's true. I mean, it is true, obviously, but they fundamentally, if someone walks into your police station and starts saying stuff, it's just the most basic thing to say, why is this person here? Could they have any ulterior motives, or what is their motivation for being here? and that just never happened. And that's the most basic thing that you have to do. And then with regard to it being a multidisciplinary investigation, there was a time a few months ago, certainly when I first heard about this and when I first started to research it, when I thought, okay, well, this was really difficult for the police. Um, they don't have medical qualifications. Obviously, it's a big investigation. They might not understand some of the fundamentals. But given that we now know that they were told you should involve all these people, and they didn't, it's not as if they needed to work this out themselves. They were told by the National Crime Agency involve these people. Something else I learned the other day is that even at Lucy's second arrest, so even in 2019, when Lucy had been arrested for the second time, and their line of questioning became very much more forceful at that time, they still didn't have radiography. They still hadn't heard from Arthur's at that date. It's quite possible they'd only heard from Evans, because in Evans' statement that he submits to the police, a witness statement that's in July, that's a month after Lucy's arrested for the second time, in that July statement, he says, well, we still haven't seen radiography information. So by that point, they'd really decided Lucy was guilty.
I,
Um,
I think they decided Lucy was guilty from the moment Steve Breary and Ravi pointed the finger at her. Uh,
hmm,
I don't think there's any question about that. And then, Ravi and Steve were backed up by Dr. Evans turning up, volunteering his services, and saying within 10 minutes, this is an inflicted liver injury on baby O. So again, they were completely starstruck with three consultant pediatricians. I mean, I think I saw an email where one of the police officers had written that Dr. Dowie Evans was very impressive,
hmm,
but they didn't do
yeah,
due diligence on him either. And Dowie really conducted the investigation, which is quite staggering.
hmm,
I've seen an email where he says, oh, we don't need the maternity notes.
hmm,
Anybody with an ounce of sense will know that what happens to a baby as soon as they're born is reflected in what had happened to them when they were still in the uterus. Yet there was no maternity notes, no obstetric input at all. So I do on some levels feel a bit sorry for Cheshire Police, but they still did a rubbish job. And I wish now they could just be open and honest and say, we messed up here, we're going to do better, and this is why we messed up.
hmm. And I think they'll be forced to do that eventually. It'd just be nice if they did that now, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, so the other thing we're going to discuss briefly is just the new insulin paper and evidence. So just simply, could you kind of give me your views on that and the significance that it might have for Lucy?
Well, that is definitely new evidence. That wasn't discussed in court. The Court of Appeal have this thing where you can't have a second bite of the cherry. So even though I don't believe there was any insulin poisoning and the problems with the immunoassay tests and the fact that there was no insulin missing from the unit, there was only ever 2 ampules. I don't know where they thought she'd stockpiled all this insulin from to inject bags. Um, but yes, Helen Shannon and Jeff Chase's paper is in a very reputable journal. It's been peer reviewed, and I think it could be a game changer. And it is definitely new information that was not presented in court at all. So hopefully that will have a big impact. Um, there's lots of things that were wrong with the insulin in court. One of the things that really upsets me is that when they got the C peptide, the low C peptide and high insulin, it was stated in court that that is always exogenous insulin. And we know from baby Y that didn't end up on the indictment. He had exactly the same results, but he had those because he had congenital hyperinsulinemia. So that statement in court that high insulin, low C peptide is always exogenous actually is not true. And I think Helen and Jeff's paper goes some way to prove that is also true.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's critical because that was supposed to be the smoking gun, wasn't it?
Yeah, well,
Really?
mm,
And it just isn't.
yeah.
So, So, I mean, I think it is a big development and it's very important. I've been waiting for it to come out, and there's been no meaningful opposition to it. So, yeah, I'm really hopeful that will help open the door further going forward.
And the
So,
two insulin babies were the first two that the jury came back with the verdicts, and they were unanimous verdicts. So if the insulin cases fall, then I think all the rest of the convictions will fall as well.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been doing some work on my book and just finishing off, and one of the jobs I had to do was read it. I still haven't finished. I got halfway through. I started to do the bits on, the air embolism cases, and I mean, they just, I can't, they just don't stand up. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-boggling
No,
that
they don't stand up to scrutiny at all. When you talk to people who are far more eminent than Dr. Darry Evans and consultant paediatricians who work in level 3 units and neonatologists, Steve Breary and Ravi are general paediatricians in a small district general hospital. And it's obvious they were out of their depths. 2 ward rounds a week. You can't run an intensive care unit on 2 ward rounds a week. And the medical staff were very junior. They had GP trainees. They had pediatric registrars of varying expertise. I mean, Baby K, the registrar, had only been a registrar for 3 weeks. So they had lots of locums. You only have to read the Royal College report. It's all laid out there, what the problems were.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And of course, we should emphasize as well that that would apply on a normal unit, normal acuity. But then they had this extraordinary period with a lot of complex infants, and I think it was nearly 60% multiple births in the indictment. So then it's doubly true, isn't it? They just weren't up to it, essentially.
No, they
Um,
weren't. And the maternity side weren't shipping the mothers out to level 3 units. They were hanging on to them. Um,
hmm,
so there's got to be questions asked on the maternity side. I have big concerns about the obstetric side, um,
yeah,
and what was going on there. And I really hope the CCRC, who are the only people now who can apply for the maternity notes, are doing that, because I think that will really demonstrate that these babies were not well babies. They were not stable the way Darry Evans described them. They all had either antenatal problems or poor obstetric care. You only have to look at baby D, and poor baby D, that baby should never have passed away. That was just mismanagement on the obstetric side. And it's a tragedy. It's just a tragedy.
yeah, yeah. I hope that. A friend of mine thinks that I don't know if this is true. Obviously, it's speculative, but she thinks that Child D's mother is definitely questioning what went on and could conceivably come forward at some point.
Well, I hope
Um,
she does. And it goes back to, all these experts have written reports, and I think I've said this before. Even if you believe Lucy is guilty and you've sat through that trial, and those poor parents have been so traumatized, they've lost babies, they've had the police knocking on the door. As a parent, even if I'd have gone through all of that and I truthfully believe that my baby was harmed by Lucy, I would still want to read those reports. And not one parent has come forward to ask Mark MacDonald for their baby's report. And I think that's because of their lawyers. I don't know what their lawyers are saying to them, but I think their lawyers are holding them to ransom and saying, oh, you don't need to see that. It's not relevant. But it's very relevant. And as a parent, I would be insisting on reading those reports.
yeah, I mean, I certainly hope that someone comes forward at some point soon.
Yeah.
It's certainly in their interest, so that's not in no doubt, is it? Hopefully, I understand they've traumatized, and I understand they've processed it and want to move on, but unfortunately, the beliefs are wrong, and they've been very badly misled by the police, by the process that occurred in court. by the expert witnesses, by the paediatricians even on
And
the
by
unit,
their own lawyers. Their own lawyers
and the lawyers, yeah.
are not. I don't really understand lawyers sometimes, because you would think they would want to get to the truth for their client.
Hmm.
But that doesn't appear to be the case in this situation. They just want to keep the guilty narrative going. And I find that quite scary.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, I've read their statement that they submit to the thermal inquiry on behalf of the families, and that there is no, in my estimation, it's incumbent on the lawyers to say to the families, look, all this information has come out, all this scientific and medical information. This is emanating from much, much higher level people than appeared in the court case. And the quality of it is much higher than the information that occurred in the court case. It's in your interest to read that information and understand it. And from this statement that I've seen at the Thurl inquiry, I see no evidence that has occurred. Obviously, I don't know what's happened behind closed doors, but if they have said that to them or anything like that to them, there's no reflection of that in the statement they put in the Thurl inquiry, which would tend to indicate that they haven't said that to them.
No,
Uh,
I don't think they've said that to them, because if they had, they would be contacting Mark MacDonald,
yeah.
asking for the new expert report on their specific baby. And Mark has written to all their lawyers saying, volunteering that you can have your baby's report, and not one person has come forward and asked. And none of the lawyers have either, which is quite staggering. It just goes to show that you're either on the guilty side or the innocent side as far as the lawyers go. They're
Mm.
not interested in getting to the truth. And I find that quite scary.
It is both sad and disturbing, I would say. Well, all I can say is if I speak in the media, I will say, look, please speak to Mark or speak to David Davis. The experts will no doubt speak to you. Please come forward and please look at these reports because you've been misled,
Yeah.
basically. Anyway, let's ask you a few questions from the list, Michelle. So something that I think about and something that I've thought about when I'm speaking to various people is, this came up again the other day because I was going through correspondence that Lucy had both sent and received, and at one point an infant dies, it must be child A, and Lucy responds to this understandably in quite an emotional way, and her way of dealing with this, she wants to get back on the intensive care unit and deal with other infants. This is something that was used against her in court, as was everything she did, everything she said, regardless of whether it was correct, normal, or whatever it might be. So I just wanted to ask you about, because I spoke to Jenny about this as well, the experience of being a nurse and having an infant die, because one of the things that occurred to me is that so far removed from the average experience of someone who has a normal job. Like I never went to work and then someone died in the workplace. Then I went home and then I came back the next day and had to do the same job. You know, it's almost unimaginable to me. So I don't know what you would have to say about that or what reflection you have, but it'd be interesting to hear.
Anybody who works within a healthcare setting, you go to work to do your best and to help people. Now, midwifery is predominantly a very happy profession, because you're introducing new life, and new life is being born and creating families. But tragically, it does go wrong. And when it goes wrong, it's devastating. Um, if you work in care of the elderly, then there is to some degree a level of expectation that a 90-year-old is going to pass away. That's not to say it's not upsetting, but it's the circle of life. However, when a baby dies, or when a mum comes in and has a stillbirth, or on occasions, horrendously, a mother dies, it is absolutely devastating, and it does ripple through the entire maternity unit, including the neonatal unit and the maternity ward. It affects the obstetricians, the midwives, the neonatal nurses, everybody. and you're very closely involved with the family. You know, there's a husband possibly bereaved, there's certainly a mother and a father bereaved. When a baby dies on a neonatal unit, we try to create memories. I mean, the baby could die within an hour of life. Sometimes babies have been on the unit for a long time, weeks. I've even known babies to be on there for 9 months, a year, and then sadly pass away. So you try and create memories for those parents and for the siblings. Everything during this trial has been weaponized against Lucy. I've sent bereavement cards to parents. I've attended babies' funerals. We always tried to have a representation of the nursing staff at a funeral. But in court, Nick Johnson made it sound as if it was something macabre, if this Lucy was gloating. It's had an horrendous effect on neonatal nurses and the way parents view neonatal nurses and midwives. It's like, I think on one of the babies, the mother said that Lucy came in with the cold cot and said, should we put the baby in the cot now? You've been cuddling him a long time. I think the way that was portrayed was horrendous, because you do take a cold cot to a parent's room where they're with their deceased baby. And some parents want to hold that baby for hours and hours and hours. And other parents just want to put the baby in the cot, and they want to run out the unit, literally. They don't want to stay. And it's sometimes very hard to gauge what a parent wants and what they don't want. So asking questions is not Lucy being mean or macabre or anything. It's trying to very delicately assess what this particular family, what their needs are, because every family is individual. They're all so different. And it's very upsetting. Nobody wants a baby to die. And you get you get to see the grandparents. Sometimes we've had christenings on the unit, baptisms. Each family is individual, and they must be treated as individuals, and they all have different requirements, and some of that comes with experience. Some of it is just a horrendous learning curve.
What do you think about kind of coping mechanisms? So Lucy, her coping mechanism that she described in this correspondence was, I want to go back on the nursery one, deal with an infant that's in a similar circumstance to create a positive imprint on my memory, basically. Could you kind of comment on,
I can absolutely relate to that. I mean, nurses, like doctors, come in all shapes and sizes, and I'm not talking physically, I'm talking about the way they view their careers and their jobs. I always loved intensive care. That's why I became a nurse practitioner. I love special care as well, but it sounds awful because nobody wants a sick baby. I don't want babies to be sick. But I did enjoy that aspect of nursing. I enjoyed caring for babies in intensive care and high dependency. Now, Lucy has been criticised for that. Some nurses just want to be outside doing special care and teaching parents how to bath their babies, how to feed their babies. And that's fine as well. We need all levels of skills. I don't see anything wrong at all in Lucy saying she wanted to get back to work. It's that old saying, isn't it? You fall off a horse and you have to get back on it. And that sounds awful, and that sounds very callous, and I don't mean to sound like that, but that is a fact of life. It is a job that has extreme rewards, but can be horrendously upsetting and traumatizing. at the same time. And again, like the parents, the health professionals are all different. We all react differently.
Absolutely. So, and we've kind of touched upon this already. So I think I'll ask you this question. So there's a comment here about infants being moved around between the Countess of Chester, Liverpool Women's Hospital, Arrow Park. And then there's a comment about potential incentives, financial, for infants to be born in a certain hospital and so forth. So I don't think we can really comment on that too much because we don't know I mean, we know that there can be, but we don't know what the motivation was for this. We don't know why decisions were made. It's impossible for us to say. But more broadly, what how do you have any
So,
comments or do you have any
yeah.
thoughts on the
So
movement of infants?
the Department of Health in 2003 wrote a white paper looking at streamlining neonatal services. And from that came all the regional networks. So Chester came under Merseyside Regional Neonatal Network. The sad fact is that women and children are not high priority within the health service. There is not enough level 3 beds. Babies are constantly being shipped left, right, and centre. I mean, and this happens across the country. This isn't just within Mersey region, it's across the country. So many children's hospitals didn't used to have a neonatal unit. Great Ormond Street, I think, only got a neonatal unit in 2019. So any babies requiring surgery at Great Ormond Street, say who were born at, I don't know, Queen Charlotte's or Chelsea and Westminster, would go to Great Ormond Street, have surgery, and then come back across London. That's no different in Mersey region. These, babies would go to Liverpool Women's. Liverpool Women's don't have a surgical unit, so they would then transfer them to Alder Hey. They'd have the surgery, and then they'd come back to Liverpool Women's. And when they recovered, they would move them back to their hospital they'd come from, which could be Chester or Leighton or wherever, Warrington. But because of the bed pressures in these level 3 units, I think quite often babies are sent back to their unit because of bed pressures. They're getting better, but maybe if there wasn't those bed pressures, they may keep them for a few extra days. But babies are constantly crisscrossing the country all over. And very often, because of the shortage of level 3 beds, babies end up out of region. So in Chester, I know of babies who've gone to Manchester. I know they've gone to Birmingham. I've even gone in ambulances with babies down to Birmingham. I've known it that when you have had multiple births, twins, and especially triplets, that they can end up in 3 different hospitals or 2 different hospitals, which is really hard for parents. They're crisscrossing the country, and then the babies are sent back. So it is a national problem. It's not just a Merseyside problem, and it's due to resources. I think there's not enough level 3 beds, and I don't know whether the money plays a factor in with not transferring the mothers out. I definitely think with some of these mothers in Chester who should have been transferred to level 3 units, they were dissuaded. I know Jim McCormack talked, I think it was baby C's mother, out of going to Liverpool Women's, so she delivered in Chester. Was that due to money? Because the money goes with the mother rather than the hospital being paid. I think if you talk to John Ashton, he talks a lot about the problems that have occurred with finances and hospitals competing above their levels of capability since the introduction of foundation trusts. And Chester was one of the first foundation trusts in the country. So it's multifactorial, but I think it's awful. And you've got to look at also these babies in Mersey region, Greater Manchester, Lancashire. These hospitals are 20, 30, 40, 50 miles apart. So these poor babies are being trucked down motorways and A roads. When you're in London, there's lots of hospitals. So they're maybe 2 or 3 miles apart. That is not true in the rest of the country. They're many miles apart, and we don't have a really good helicopter service. I think that's a big mistake across the country again. I've heard of babies being born in Kent who need to go to a big level 3 in London or Brighton. And again, they're traveling in the back of ambulances. Why don't we have a helicopter service?
Mm.
I think there's lots of problems with all of those issues.
So I think one of the things you mentioned that I perhaps don't reflect on enough is the impact on the parents. Obviously, it's already an extremely stressful situation. Your baby's born premature. Even, I mean, let's rewind to start. Just the fact that you're there thinking, "Oh, this is a normal pregnancy. I'll be giving birth in a few months from now," and then all of a sudden you're not giving birth a few months from now. You're giving birth, weeks and months before you're supposed to be. So then you're going through what is a stressful experience anyway. It's not expected, it's not anticipated. You obviously know this makes my infant more vulnerable, and then you're praying, hopefully that won't happen. Then your prayers are not answered, so then the infant is vulnerable. So then you're hoping the infant recovers, and it's touch and go. And basically, as we know, they're in a neonatal unit because they won't survive otherwise. Then you're told they're going to be transferred somewhere else. So then you've got to go. I mean, it must be an absolute. It must. I think I do underestimate that sometimes. So I think that's an interesting aspect of what you said. And you've described to me previously, like, parents live on the neonatal unit virtually.
It
Um,
becomes a way of life. They're there with their other children. The grandparents come in. You really get to know the entire extended family. But these parents, I mean, some of these babies, certainly on Lucy's indictment, were born in Chester, moved to Arrow Park, then moved to Liverpool Women's, then went to Alderhay, then went back to Arrow Park, then came back to Chester. It's not right at all, but that is the system that we are dealing with. Um, and I don't think, unless, God forbid, you're ever in that situation where you have a sick child, you understand what actually goes on, because it's not high publicity. It's not about A&E waiting times and cancer treatments and people having heart attacks. You hardly ever read about what actually happens in a neonatal unit and how these babies are shipped left, right, and centre across the country. They're not high on the government's agenda. A&E waiting times, patients in corridors, you can pick up every paper every day of the week and read about. Cancer waiting times, surgery being cancelled, people not getting their hip replacements, all of which is wrong. I'm not saying that's right at all. But at the same time, children and mothers you don't very often hear about.
yeah, absolutely. So I guess just to finish this topic off, the 17 indictment infants, and of those 17, 11 were transferred at least once. Some of them transferred multiple times. Is that normal? Is that acceptable? What would your reflection on that be?
I don't think any of that is acceptable. I mean, okay, if you have a baby born in a level 2 and that baby becomes very sick, it's understood they may need to be transferred to a big level 3 unit. The problem is, I don't think parents realise that lots of level 3 units are not paediatric surgery. So then if they require surgery, they've got to be transferred to a children's hospital. And that's true across the country. So I know of a baby who was born in Chester and then became very sick and ended up in Bolton and then was transferred to St Mary's in Manchester. I know of other babies that were born in Chester, as I say, that went to Arrow Park. Then Arrow Park transferred them to Liverpool Women's, and then Liverpool Women's transferred them to Alderhay, and then they go back to either Arrow Park or Liverpool Women's. It's the same in North Wales. They could be born in Bangor, they end up in Glan Clwyd, Clwyd then transfers them to Liverpool Women's. It is a system that is under immense stress and needs radical overhaul. And one of the biggest problems is that a lot of children's hospitals, up until recently, have not had neonatal units. As I say, I believe Great Ormond Street only got a neonatal unit in 2019. I think Alder Hayes now got a neonatal unit. The reason why these babies ended up going back to the level 3s is because otherwise you end up putting them on a paediatric intensive care unit, which is not the right place for them to be. They need to be on a neonatal intensive care unit.
Yeah,
so I hope that is changing somewhat, but from what I understand with my friends on the transport teams, it's still a big issue. And it's not just within Greater Manchester, Chester, and Merseyside, it's across the country.
So in this cohort of infants, do you think the fact that so many of them were transferred, is that reflective of the reality that they shouldn't have been born in this hospital in the first place?
Well, many of them fulfilled the criteria to be born in a level 2. If you take baby C, on paper, that baby was born at 30 weeks gestation. So fulfilled the criteria to be born in a level 2. However, you have to understand the backstory to that baby. And that baby had been very sick antenatally from 17 weeks. And when he was born, was actually born half the size that he should have been for that gestation. So only weighed 800 grams, had lots of problems antenatally. And I think on that should have been born in Liverpool Women's. But Jim McCormack made the decision and persuaded the mum to stay in Chester. With hindsight, I think that was wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to another topic now, which is stillbirths. So there is a question from a viewer here, which I can answer myself, but we'll talk more broadly about the topic of stillbirths. So the first question is, was there an increase in the rate of stillbirths in the period in question? The answer to that is yes. We have explicit figures that indicate that is the case. And I can also answer the second part in one word. Did Cheshire Police take any account of that? No, they didn't. We can be very confident they didn't take that into consideration because it's a bit of a, this is too much, it's far too lateral. They didn't even take into account things they definitely should have taken into account. So they wouldn't, there's no way
they didn't look at any of the maternity problems. So they were never going to look at the stillbirths when they didn't even obtain the maternity notes of the babies who were put on the indictment, who clearly had antenatal problems. So the stillbirth rate going up is indicative to me that potentially something was going wrong on the maternity side with the obstetrics. But without seeing the notes and seeing what was happening to these women, it's very hard to judge, really.
Absolutely.
But I mean, every one of the babies on the indictment is a huge, huge failing that nobody looked at the maternity notes or asked questions. And certainly, as I said before, baby D, that tragic baby should not have died. That was clear, gross medical negligence. That baby's mum should have had antibiotics, and they didn't.
Yeah, I think I can say at this point that in my book I do have a bit more about the maternity and obstetric picture at the hospital from someone who worked at the hospital, who isn't Michele. So it's not loads and loads and loads, but it gives you more of a, it definitely gives us some more insight into the hospital. And obviously the obstetric and maternity aspect is discussed at considerable length.
But you have to look at what's happening across the country. You know, we've had Morecambe Bay scandal, we've had Shrewsbury and Telford scandal, we've had Nottingham, we've got Leeds, we've got Oxford, the John Radcliffe, University Hospital Sussex. I've heard rumours that Cardiff is got big problems. All maternity hospitals across the country, to me, are in crisis. And Chester was no different, apart from they very cleverly swerved the fact the maternity was in crisis, and they pointed the finger at an innocent nurse, which is quite a spectacular achievement on some levels. But all again, it goes back to women and children are not high priority. And for many, many years, maternity, it's been a slow, insidious drip, drip. If you replace midwives with maternity support workers, if you have an ethos of not having medical intervention, I think the training schedules, how midwives are now trained, is completely wrong. Direct entry midwifery has been, to me, a disaster. And this is reflected across the country. It's not rocket science. And then you have to look at who's managing them. So Peter Herring was the chief executive in Chester, and he oversaw the culling of the 8 nurses, of which I was one, in Chester between 2006 and 2010. In 2012, he left and went to Shrewsbury and Telford. And then in 2015, he went to Nottingham. Now, he's a man with an agenda. He's been given a job to do. And yet Shrewsbury and Telford and Nottingham have both had Donna Ockenden maternity inquiries. Why aren't people joining up the dots here?
I don't know. The more I learn about this, the more extraordinary it becomes, because you realize that what is a not, it's a regrettable situation, obviously, but it's not that far out of the ordinary. And yet, no one at the hospital could look at themselves and say, are we in the wrong? Are we screwing up, basically?
And
It's
I
quite,
don't understand why these hospitals are not looking at their litigation when it is rumoured that the litigation payouts now are higher than the actual maternity budgets. Now,
incredible.
that is red flags everywhere. And you would think that these hospitals would go, oh no, we've got to start listening to our clinicians and changing what has gone on, because we can't continue with this. We want mothers and babies to be safe, to have healthy pregnancies, healthy deliveries with no untoward effects. But when you talk to people like Dr. Martin Pittman, who was raising very genuine concerns, and they sacked him.
Yeah, yeah.
They didn't go, oh, Martin's right, we need to sort this out because we've got, litigation coming at us, and we need to make sure that mothers and babies are not being harmed. No. Did they investigate that? No. What they did was they sacked him.
And I think one of the things that Martin said to me that is interesting as well, to say the least, is that he was right. Like everything he said all the figures went down.
Yeah.
So yes, it's extraordinary. It's very sad. I think that people that want to raise the stand. I mean, Lucy's. It seems we don't have the full picture of Lucy in the same way as we do with Martin. I would say, but it seems from what we know about her, and it seems from what we have from documents that she wanted to, and everything that I've heard about her as well, and probably you have as well, Michelle,
Yeah.
that she wanted to raise the standards on the internet and she wanted things to be done right.
Yeah. She wanted to follow the protocols and guidelines. She would call people out if they were trying to cut corners, and she's to be admired, not vilified. What's happened to her, but it's an ethos within hospitals. You hear so many doctors who are being managed out because they raise concerns, nurses and doctors, and that whole culture just has to change, because otherwise more and more mums and babies are going to be dying, harmed. We're a relatively wealthy country, and this shouldn't be happening in this country. It's, I mean, even the infrastructure, it's like having the sewage come up. It's,
Mm.
I think Dr. Shuley at his press conference said, if this had been a hospital in Canada, it would have been shut down. And
Mm.
yet we just try and slide everything under the carpet. And that's
Mm.
just not right.
Mm. And I think we're both old enough to have seen a very clear decline. I don't think I think hardly anyone of our generation would say, oh, things are as good today as they were 30 years ago in the healthcare system. I don't think anyone would claim that, would they? Um,
No, I mean, some things are good. I
Mm,
can't completely knock the NHS. Some, you
mm,
know, cancer treatments have moved on dramatically, surgery has moved on dramatically, but it is also the infrastructure. You've got, I think when Nye Bevan set it up, he didn't realize, I think his ethos was that, oh, we have a good health service and then people won't get sick. So actually the pressures on the NHS will reduce. But in actual fact, the pressures have increased because the population's increased, medicines are more expensive, surgery's advanced, and people are living longer. And going back to maternity, that equates to mothers. Mothers who previously would never have got pregnant are now getting pregnant. They have their own medical conditions, which are very complex. Mothers are older. It's so multifactorial the way it is, and I think there is some good things in the NHS, but it needs a radical overhaul, and it needs people like Dr. Pittman heading up, talking
yeah.
to the people and saying, this is what needs implementing, this is what we need to do. But instead of that, he's been sacked, and that's just,
Mm.
it's just, and he's not the only doctor that's happened to. I've heard of so many calling out, whistleblowing on things, and the hospital's answer is to get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's change tack. And this is quite a long question with a lot of text. I'll read out the whole thing, but it's about nursing skills and skill sets, basically.
Okay.
Just wanted to reflect on a major thread, and I'm sure Michelle would agree with this. What the crux of the nursing staffing is skill mix. When you look at the unit, when we talk about special care, high dependency, and NICU, these are not geographical locations or beds. They each describe the level of care rather than location. What it very much sounds like is a grossly understaffed in terms of skill mix and stretch unit. They may well have had the correct number of people on the unit, but did the people have the right level of skill, knowledge, and experience to put the jigsaw pieces together? In my sister's case, she was in an adult intensive care unit being nursed by an agency nurse who had never worked in an ITU. At inquest, it was described how the nurse was a perfectly competent general nurse who may well have been able to monitor the wiggly lines going up and down, but did not have what they needed to pull the signs together. So at a time my sister was suffering acute cerebral edema, the nurse missed every one of the signs. So when talking about agency nurses filling shifts, etc., do we know anything about their skill, knowledge, and experience base, or do we just know that they were nurses? I really do think we should focus on the skill mix rather than the numbers of staff. So I'm sure you've got loads to say about that.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. And certainly in
Okay.
Chester, if you're in London, there's lots of agency staff. And if you're in
Yeah.
a big city like Manchester or Liverpool, but a small city like Chester, you really don't have agency staff. You're relying on the staff you have working on what's called the bank and doing extra shifts. And
Right.
that's certainly what Lucy was doing. We know that some weeks she worked 60 hours. Um, the neonatal unit in Chester, and most neonatal units that I've worked in, do have geographical areas. So you have intensive care rooms, you have high dependency rooms, and you have special care nurseries. So the babies in each of those are categorized within their level of care. Now, the staffing levels is a big problem. So if we talk about baby K, it is stated that the night baby K was born, there was two babies in intensive care, and Caroline Oakley, a very competent registered nurse, very experienced, I know Caroline very well, was looking after those two babies in intensive care. In high dependency, there was three babies, of which Lucy was looking after two, and Joanne Williams was looking after one. And then baby K was born at 25 weeks gestation. So Joanne went to look after baby K. That left Lucy with three babies in high dependency. Caroline Oakley's got the two, and then Jo Williams has got the 25-week gestation baby. And that was to some level of the registered nurses on night duty that night. The other three nurses were nursery nurses, so they were looking after nursery 3 and 4 special care and transitional care, which is upstairs on the postnatal ward. So 3 registered nurses for 6 babies is not the right level of care at all. It's not the right level of staffing. They needed to have at least a 4th registered nurse on that night, but they didn't. They had 3 on, looking after 6 babies. So in intensive care, if you look at the background guidelines, intensive care should be 1-to-1. That was already broken before baby K was born because Caroline Oakley was looking after 2 babies in intensive care. High dependency should be 1 nurse to 2 babies. Once baby K was born, that was broken because Lucy was then looking after 3 babies in high dependency. And when a 25-week gestation baby is born, you really need more than 1 nurse because initially it's all systems go. You've got to put in umbilical venous catheters, long lines, umbilical artery catheters. You're ventilating this baby. You're having to give various drugs, set up infusions. And there was only Joe Williams there. So I think the staffing levels were very poor on that night shift. And from what I've seen from work that Peter Elston has done, that was not an unusual occurrence. The shift chart that is infamous now, saying that Lucy was there for all the occasions, which we know is rubbish, also doesn't talk about, it has all the nurses listed, but not all of them worked clinically. So Ariane Powell, who was the manager, didn't work clinically, yet she's on that list. Yvonne Farmer, who was the, oh gosh, I've forgotten her job title now, practice development. She was there initially to teach the nursery nurses, and then she took over when I left teaching the registered nurses. So although she's teaching, she's not necessarily got a caseload of looking after babies clinically, though she may initially be helping and teaching within the clinical setting, but most of her lectures was in a classroom and doing additional courses to keep nurses' competencies up, checking them. So that roster chart had so many problems with it. And yes, to go back to your listeners' comments, I think you've got to have the right skill mix. You've got to have the right level of training. When the 8 nurses, which I was one, we got rid of, the hospital employed 8 nursery nurses. 8 nursery nurses have a role to play, but they should be there to enhance the care of a registered nurse, not to replace a registered nurse. And that's happening across the board. We're seeing this now in all walks of life from hospitals. Midwives being replaced by maternity support workers, registered nurses on the general side being replaced by healthcare assistants, healthcare practitioners, doctors being replaced with physician associates. They all have a role to play, but they should be there to enhance the care of the registered nurses, the midwives, the doctors, not to replace them. And to me, it's all about cost cutting. That's the bottom line. I was a band 8B, so 2 nursery nurses are bands 4, and people in accountant rooms go, oh, we could get 2 for the price of 1 here, but they're not looking at experience, they're not looking at expertise, they're not looking at qualifications, they're not looking at years of practice. Lucy was deemed to be senior after 3 years post-qualification. You can't compare her experience with mine after 30 years.
No. So in my book, you've given me a lot of information, and we've discussed a lot of different things, and you've highlighted various things. And one of them is that there's this kind of, I don't know if it's quite infamous, but quite well-known incident now where Lucy's at a salsa class and they're texting her to say, how do you do this? Is it immunoglobulin thing?
Yeah. She'd had 3 missed phone calls when she came out. She was off duty. She'd gone out with some of her girlfriends salsa dancing, and when she came out of the class, she had 3 missed phone calls from the unit because they didn't know how to administer the immunoglobulin. So I've never worked out whether she went back down to the hospital, because she lived not far from the hospital, or whether she talked them through it on the phone. But I certainly know that when she next came on duty, her Ariane Powell and Yvonne Farmer, the practice development nurse, sat down and wrote the guideline on how to administer immunoglobulin.
Yeah. And is that indicative of skill deficit on the unit, would you say?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, completely. Um, I mean, I know Ariane Powell very well. She's lovely. She was a very good, competent nurse and competent manager. But once she became the manager, she wasn't working clinically anymore. Yvonne Farmer, as I say, was the practice development nurse. So Lucy, because she'd just been at Liverpool Women's and was up to date working in a level 3, she helped them to write the protocol. Is that right? Don't know. Maybe they should have obtained the Liverpool Women's protocol and cross-referenced it. I don't know. I haven't seen the protocol, so I don't actually know what was written. But I think there was lots and lots of issues. But it's all about the pressures of being short-staffed, not enough skill mix, not the right skill mix, the experience of the 8 nurses when we left. Completely diluted what was going on in that unit. And as I say, you can't compare newly qualified nurses with nurses who've got 10, 20, 30 years experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's ask you about Datix. So I think there's a question here that I don't think we can answer, but I'll ask you the question and you can give me your reflections on the whole issue, I guess. So someone has asked, it was interesting to hear about regular review meetings with Datix reports previously, including the presence of the reporter. I was wondering if this practice continued and Lucy Letby was present when review took place of the Datix reports she had submitted. So I don't think we know the answer to that, but
Well, going back, the Datix reports, there would be a meeting every month with clinical governance. The problem is with the Datix, a lot of doctors don't like them. A lot of nurses don't like them either, for that matter. Some nurses are better at filling them in than others. It tended to be nurses who filled them in rather than the medical staff, the residents or the registrars. But then the person marking them was Steve Breary in Chester. So he had access to all of them. And if he saw something he didn't like, who's to say what he did? Did he just bury it under the carpet? I don't know. We haven't seen the minutes of the Datix meetings. Did he implement changes? Is that why he had an issue with Lucy? Because she was submitting a lot of Datexes and that was increasing his workload because he was ultimately responsible for overseeing them and changing practice if it needed changing. We don't know. But I definitely think it was wrong that Steve Breary was effectively marking his own work. But that happens all the time, and that probably happens in every department across a hospital.
Yeah, and across multiple hospitals.
Yeah.
But why it seems so strange to me that I mean I'm trying to think of a parallel from I mean as an example, you know, if I write something, obviously I've written something recently, you know, I then meet the editors. I mean, I can't say I'm the author, so therefore, you know, you just have to. I mean, I have to listen to their feedback, and I have to take it seriously. And no one dies. No one dies if I don't do that. So I just find it really strange that this culture seemingly has developed where you're not allowed to be critical, and people can't accept criticism. I mean, mistakes are part of life. We're all human, and we're
But
inevitably.
that goes back to the culture of them sacking people like Martin Pittman, who raised genuine concerns and has been validated in the fact that he was right. You know, people, for some reason, they don't want to listen to that. And it's the same with the Datexes. When I was there, I used to sit on the Datix committee, and there was an issue that we had all the time with a drug called netclymycin, which is an antibiotic. And if you have to check toxicity levels, because if it's too high on a prem baby, you can cause permanent deafness. And the policy was that this drug was administered 18 hourly. And for some reason, every time we had a Datix meeting, there would be a couple of incidences where the netclymycin had been given at 12 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 14 hours. People just couldn't work out 18 hours. And I wanted to change the prescription chart. So I went to pharmacy and I said, this is a prescription chart. We're having multiple incidents of this drug being incorrectly given because of the timing. For some reason, nobody can work out 18 hours. Can we change it? And I was blocked because they said, oh, no, we want standard prescription charts across the trust. Now, that to me is very short-sighted because each clinical area is very different. This was an intensive care unit, a neonatal intensive care unit. And I think to prevent that happening, we should have been able to design our own prescription charts. But I was blocked. I don't know whether they ever managed to rectify that problem, but I've heard from nurses that it's still an issue, that giving drugs at funny times of the day and the hours, the drugs get forgotten about, they get given too early, they don't get given at all. It's an ongoing saga. So it's not just the clinicians marking their own homework like Steve Brewery, it's other factors within the hospital of blocking things to change and make practice the best practice you can have. And that's exactly why whistleblowers get into trouble, because the hospital, instead of going, oh, they've got a point here, we can't continue to be either forgetting drugs, giving them at the wrong time, we need to tighten this up, they just go, oh, no, forget about it. And that's dangerous, because if you have a child who gets too much netclymycin and then becomes deaf, you're going to end up with litigation. So it all goes back to litigation.
Yeah. So I mean, do you think that is fundamentally it? Just people are scared of being sued, or people are scared of having legal? Is that why this culture has developed, do you think?
I don't know. I really don't. I don't believe that anybody goes to work with the intention of making a mistake or harming anybody. But we have a blame culture, and I think we really have to get away from that within a medical setting to a no blame culture where people feel safe and supported to go, this has happened, it shouldn't have happened, how can we prevent it happening again? They don't, but when you feel intimidated or you're going to be witch hunted, people just don't report things then. And I think that's the problem with the Datix, is that's why the Datexes are hated. A lot of people don't want to fill them in because they're, oh, am I going to get into trouble? But actually it's about improving the care, improving the system.
Yeah.
So we have to get rid of this blame culture, and we have to look at, not let accountants just go, oh, well, Michelle's an 8B, so we can get 2 nursery nurses, without looking at expertise, training, experience. When, people raise legitimate concerns about potentially this is dangerous practice or we're going to hurt a mother or a baby, instead of sacking that person, they should go, this person's got a valid point and we need to look at this and we need to do something to change it.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to ask you a question now that I know nothing about at all. And it very much feeds into the issue of obstetrics again. But someone has commented, triplets O&P had respiratory issues. Mother was given steroids, helps to mature baby lungs at 23 weeks, but did not deliver until 33 weeks. By then, I believe the steroids were worthless. I think she should have gotten another round of steroids, probably another screw up by obstetrics. The list seems endless, and I blame obstetrics as much as pediatrics for the health of the babies. So I think we definitely agree with the assertions on obstetrics, and you might want to talk about that. But do you kind of have any comment on the
Yeah,
specific.
I mean, I have no idea what was going on the maternity side, but there was
Yeah.
clear issues. Those triplets should definitely have had more steroids. The steroids 10 weeks earlier, you know, it's just they should have had more steroids. But it's like baby K. Baby K's mum, I believe, had been on labour ward for 3 days and only had one lot of steroids. Why? She should have had two lots of steroids. She should have had antibiotics. I don't know if she had antibiotics. I don't know if she had magnesium because she had eclampsia.
Mm.
Um, there are huge gaps in the knowledge we have about what was happening to these babies, as I've said previously, antenatally. But there was big issues on the obstetric side. And as I've said previously, baby D was clear gross medical negligence. That baby, that mum had ruptured membranes for 60 hours and should definitely have had antibiotics. And as soon as that baby was born, if I'd have been there, I would have taken that baby and done a full infection screen and started that baby on antibiotics. But that didn't happen either. That baby wasn't taken to the neonatal unit till 4 hours of age. And there was delays with all these things. Baby K, they didn't take the surfactant to the delivery room. I think baby K was nearly 45 minutes old before that baby got surfactant. If I went to a delivery of a 25-week gestation baby, I would take the surfactant with me because you know that baby's going to have surfactant. So there's huge gaps in what was going on, what is best practice, and what we know was happening. And definitely, I think the obstetric side do not have clean hands in all of this.
Mm.
And I think I've said in previous podcasts, I don't know whether this pointing the finger at Lucy came initially from the obstetric side or whether it was a combination of Steve Breary and Jim McCormack, because we know that Jim McCormack was clearly of the opinion that it was Lucy. He stood up at a meeting in May 16 and pointed the finger at Ariane Powell and said, "You're harbouring a murderer." But at no point did he reflect on his own practice. And he was the clinical lead for the fetal medicine unit. So nearly every one of these babies would have gone through the fetal medicine unit.
Yeah, I've always thought that seemed like a really extraordinary outburst from him, um, given that he's not he's kind of a peripheral figure for most of the what we've got from Thirlwall, and yet he did this very, quite extreme comment, I would say.
But he also, I mean, I got told that he'd made other comments in a data meeting in September 16 when
Mm.
he made what I thought was a quip when I was first told it of, well, there's either really bad care on this unit or there's a serial killer at work. And
Mm.
that was pretty early on in it. At Thirlwall, if you talk about baby C, he very clearly said that he wasn't at all surprised that tragically baby C had passed away because there'd been so many problems antenatally. But he didn't go to the trial and say that. He wasn't called. He didn't
Mm.
discuss any of that. Um, I mean, where's these people's ethics and morals that
Mm.
when they heard the stories that Dowie Evans was bounding about, surely some of them should have gone, well, come on, that's just not true. But they kept this narrative going.
Mm.
And I find that really frightening.
Mm.
Even the whoosh test that you and I have discussed before, they would all know that that's just nonsense. Dowie saying injecting air down a nasogastric tube is a cause of murder. It's just nonsense.
Mm.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how a lot of them sleep at night, if I'm honest.
I think McCormack as well. I'm pretty sure when he was at Thirlwall, uh, he I'm sure he was one of many, not the only one of many people who said, looking at the picture, I think it's for child C, could have been other infants. I wouldn't have suspected a thing. There's no reason to suspect a thing looking at the clinical picture of the infant and so forth. But then it's just like he just says it's like they just park that to one side and just say, well, let's forget about all that and just officially Lucy's guilty, so now we'll just say Lucy's guilty and that's it.
Yeah,
I'll forget everything I know about medicine, everything I know about the background, everything I know about the context. Just forget all of that because it's more convenient to just blame everything on Lucy.
yeah, and I find that I find that staggering and very upsetting, if I'm
Mm.
honest.
It
That
is upsetting.
I really find it very disturbing that, baby C, he built up a rapport with that mother. He was scanning her from 17 weeks. Um, and yet he's very happy to go along with the ethos that it was Lucy without declaring, actually, this baby was very, very sick and likely had a very poor outcome because of all the problems antenatally with the placenta. The baby wasn't growing, the baby's lungs weren't developing because they had oligohydramnios, had reverse end diastolic flow, which has known poor outcomes. And yet he let Dowie Evans get away with his nonsense and said it was all Lucy. I really, I don't know how people sleep at night with their conscience. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree. So just to finish, Michelle, because I know you've got to go soon. As we sit here today, Peter Hitchens has recently written a very powerful article on the current situation, noting that Lucy's been in prison for 2,000 days now, and that the criminal justice system continues to move at its usual pace. Um, I've got a question here about how long do you think it will be before Lucy's convictions are completely overturned and dismissed? We don't know the answer to that question, but how would you reflect on the situation at this point in time?
Um, Well, Thirlwall has recently issued a statement saying that she's not going to be pressurised to release her report and she won't release it while Parliament's on recess, which to me means that she's kicked that back to the autumn because they're going to recess for the whole of the summer. So she's kicking it down the line. We're due to have the coroner's inquest in September. I don't know whether they will go ahead. At the moment, they're listed, but I won't be at all surprised if they don't get moved again, kicked down the line. Um, we've got the applications into the CCRC, and there is more and more stuff coming all the time. I hope that the CCRC are going to kick it back before the end of summer. And Vera Bird is the interim head of the CCRC, and I've been told that she's leaving in October. So I would hope that she would want to leave a clear desk for her successor and that they will have referred it back to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal, however, is a very different animal. And to have a hearing for the Court of Appeal, it's going to be a very long hearing. So, and we know that courts are backed up. So even if, let's say all things being equal, that the CCRC kick it back in 1st of September, it goes to the Court of Appeal. It's probably going to be a 6-month hearing for this if they refer all aspects of what Mark has submitted, which means that it probably won't be heard for another 3 years because they're going to need a 6-month slot. And that I find frightening because that means Lucy's sitting in jail until she's 40. She's now 36 by the time we've done all of this and get a hearing. I think there should be special circumstances. I'm not, Lucy needs to get back to the Court of Appeal quickly so that when she's exonerated, she can have a life, she can have children. If we don't get back until she's 40 and then, there's all these different protocols and hoops to jump through, we are denying her the right to have a normal life and potentially to meet somebody, to have a family herself, to try and resurrect her life. Not that it will ever be the same as it was before all of this. So again, it goes back to compassion, it goes back to ethics and morals, and I think the judiciary should expedite this and say, this isn't right. We need to show that we are listening and that we do care about people. We're not just going to lock people up and throw away the key and forget about them. And I hope the judiciary, the Court of Appeal, once they get the referral, go, okay, we're going to really expedite this. That's my hope and prayers. I don't know whether I'm being foolish in that thought. But
I don't think you are. I think there's a very good chance it will be because of the high profile nature, and it's going to become more high profile. So I think there's a good chance it will be expedited, but we can't be complacent about that. We need to keep pushing for it. And in a way, I feel bad that, there's so many other people that should be receiving an appeal hearing, but I do think as well that this case is going to have huge ramifications societally, and it's one that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible to shine a light on the problems that we know exist.
And to stop it happening to somebody else. I think there's currently 6 nurses in jail, and I have quite severe concerns about quite a few of those convictions. And it's this magical insulin again that, seems to be the murder method. I have lots of concerns about lots of the nurses in jail. And there's so many people in jail now that could actually be very quickly expedited if they're a miscarriage, like Andrew Malkinson. They had DNA evidence for Andrew Malkinson, and they sat on it. And that, again, is disgraceful. And I don't know how those police officers and the people who knew that sleep at night, because they kept that poor gentleman in prison for many, many years when they knew it wasn't him. I think this country has lost its moral compass, to be honest. I think there's lots of areas they've completely lost their moral compass.
I agree. I think that's a good place to end our discussion. So yeah, thanks again, Michelle, not just for today, but thanks for all the support you've given me over months and indeed years now, I would say. It's really very much appreciated. So we always like to hear from you. So we will no doubt do so again in the future. And I'll speak to you again soon.
Well, thank you for having me, Chris, and good luck with the book. We'll keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. See you again soon.
Okay, take care.